yourself before away. Welcome. I don't have a lot to say. I just thought I would kind of set the tone here for what Austin's going to share. I think it was maybe the end of September, probably middle of September. I got an email from a fellow at Christian Aid Ministries who said they need a young man, they need a couple of young men to, maybe it was just one, I can't remember, but to go to Haiti for 4 to 6 months to help with some house rebuilding that was going on there after the earthquake here in August, I believe, of this year. I mentioned that at the supper table that evening, and his English perked up immediately. Yeah, he thinks he'd like to go. Well, of course, to go to Haiti, you need a passport. And he, as many of us have probably done in our lives, had delayed in getting his passport renewed. And he had finally got to it, but I think he had sent it off maybe 2 weeks or so before I had told him about this opportunity. Well, in this day and age, it was 10 to 12 weeks to get your passport back. Play with 12 to 15, whatever. And they wanted someone to go in October. You can do the math. It wasn't going to come out too well. So I emailed the man back and said, well, my son's interested, but his passport, he's really on a passport. So we prayed about that, and his passport, I don't know where Laura and I were at, we were somewhere. And I get a text from Austin, my passport came today. But 4 weeks from the time he sent it off, and he didn't expedite it, nothing. He just came quickly, which in this day and age is practically unheard of with COVID and all of the problems that has caused. So, you know, we had prayed about this, and he had prayed about this, and it seemed like this was the thing for him to do, to go to Haiti, and his passport came quicker than we expected. So he agreed to go. Cam did all of their procedural things and kind of rushed some things through with the process. But they got him set up to go to Haiti, and he flew back the week of the 16th. I think it was maybe on Tuesday of that week. He flew back to Ohio, and he was involved in an international crisis conference that they had there at the office for a couple of days. And I really enjoyed that, he said. And then got on the airplane to head to Haiti on Friday, the 15th of October. He got into Haiti in the middle of the afternoon, in the late afternoon, and texted us that evening, so I'm here. He didn't have a phone that worked in Haiti at that point, but he was going to get his phone to work. And so he texted on somebody else's. He said, thank you, glad you made it safe. And then I was discussing with him, once he got to the base, he could use his phone. There was Wi-Fi there. So we were WhatsApping back and forth about some of the things about his telephone. And he sent me a text that evening, and I didn't see it till the next morning. When I got up, I saw it about 8 o'clock in the morning. So I responded to it. And that response has never been read by Austin on his telephone. It went through, but I didn't go through to him. It went through wherever the holding center is for WhatsApp messages, but it never kicked out to his phone. Of course, I kept an eye on that throughout this event, hoping it was sometimes read. It never was. And incidentally, we did get him a new phone, and I don't understand how all this works, but WhatsApp, we started using WhatsApp, same telephone number, and I sent him a message again on my phone, and the one I sent back on October 16th, that's still not gone through, but all the new ones are through. So I don't know where that message is.
What did it say?
It just had to do with the situation with his phone. I was recommending what I would do with his phone to make it work in Haiti. So at that point, when I sent that at 8 in the morning, I hadn't heard it. He hadn't heard it. We didn't know he was going to the orphanage. We didn't know any of those details. The next information I got from Haiti was about noon or o'clock that day when I was called by somebody, Christian Aid Ministries, to tell us what happened. So that is how he ended up in Haiti. He was in the country less than 24 hours before he was abducted. And I will have to say that as his dad, that has been one of the most difficult things for me to process. Is why in the world did God choose a kidnapper 2 months in captivity to teach that young man what he needed to be taught? It just made no sense to me to send him to Haiti to be kidnapped. That's what God did. And I'll let Austin tell you about that experience.
There's the fanciest text set up here. There. Yes.
Oh, Ben, what's your plan for questions? For those of you in the group here, Austin said that if you have questions as he's going along, feel free to ask them in the midst of his talk. You don't have to wait until he gets to the end of a particular section of time.
But I may just tell you about answering the questions later in the talk.
And for those of you that are listening from far away, then what's the plan? Should they send you a message, send you a text? If they have a message or a question they want to ask you?
Yeah, put it in the chat. I'll put it on the chat, but put it in the chat if you can. Otherwise, I'll put my phone number in if you would rather text me and let me know that you have a question.
Just keep your eye on your phone, because I did this last night with the trucks and I forgot to watch my phone. If we took quite a while after the fact. You're not as old as I am, so you can be organized.
Okay.
Are they ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Okay, so for those of you sitting in the room, if it's too quiet, if I'm talking too quiet, let me know, and I'll definitely try and talk louder. So, as was mentioned, we had gone to an orphanage. We had left the orphanage. We were on our way back. There were 17 of us in all, 15 passenger van, if I remember correctly. And we hadn't been on the road for much more than about 10 to 15 minutes. We're driving along, talking about we had seen the orphanage, eating some snacks we had packed. I was sitting in the very back of the van, wasn't really paying attention to what was going on at the front of the van, and all of a sudden our driver slammed on the brakes. Of course, that got everybody's attention. And I looked up ahead, and across the road in front of us, there was a box truck parked across the road, a pickup. And then any spot that was not covered by the pickup of the truck was I standing there with guns. And we all, even though I'd never been down there, knew what it was. Our driver, the guy that was driving the van, was Dale White, and he was a Canadian in our group. He was driving, he quickly did as fast as he could do on that side of the vehicle and roared back down the road, and that pickup came roaring after us. The guys up on the road jumped in the pickup and came after us, and the pickup pulled up alongside of us, pulled ahead of us, pulled over in front of us, and slammed on the brakes. Obviously, we had to slam on the brakes too. And the guys hopped out of the back, came to the van, and motioned for Dale to turn around and go back to where the roadblock was. So we did. And I very distinctly remembering we started our trying to run away there, wondering if there was some bullets flying, and what exactly I was supposed to do up in the back of the van.
Your driver had been there for a while in Haiti.
He had been there for our driver had been there for about 6 months. So he knew a little bit about that. So,
Awesome. One thing, in case any of you are wondering whether they made a wrong turn or got into a section where they were not supposed to be in, that is not true. They were on a main highway that had nothing to do with being that Dale didn't know where he was going. There was no fault of Dale.
yes, this was a main highway we were on, and so this gang would sometimes stop people on this main highway. So we pulled up to the roadblock there, and were instructed to pull down the side road. The box truck that had been parked across the road was pulling down the road in front of us, and we stopped there and waited for a little while. And of course, I don't think any of you have ever been in a situation like that, but let me tell you, the prayers were flying out of our van at a high rate of speed, and people were texting people, sending messages to people, telling them to pray, informing people what had happened. And Sam Stoltzfus, who was probably the one man in our group who had been in Haiti the longest, knew Creole the best, he told us he said, just for the time being, just play dumb. If they come and ask us for anything, just play dumb, which wasn't too hard for me to do. And so, first pretty soon the guy comes back, sticks his hand in the driver's window, and starts yelling for our telephones. Well, in Creole, the word for telephone is very similar to what it is in English, but we just played dumb. And pretty soon he left. And then eventually the truck in front of us started moving, so we started following that box truck, and there were 7 vehicles in this convoy. There was 2 box trucks, our van, an ambulance behind us that this man had stolen from someone, and the pickup was behind them, and in front of the 2 box trucks was a white
Prado that we later found out was a vehicle that the leader of the gang drove. So he was in that vehicle. And just for reference point, we nicknamed just about all the guards and gangsters we've had in contact with. So the nickname for the guy in charge is Beanie. So if I refer to Beanie, I'm talking about the guy the newspapers would have called Wilson. So we headed back down this road. This was a typical Haitian road, no asphalt, just bumpy dirt road. And we came to a T, we took a left, and we were driving along, and the road was horribly bumpy. And as probably any American will do in those situations, he slowed down to kind of try and maneuver his way around the bumps and the ruts and all that stuff without hurting the vehicle too much, and then angered the gangsters behind him. All of a sudden, three of them came running up beside the van and yanked the door open and grabbed Neil by his arm and just yanked him out. One of them slapped him across the face, and two of them grabbed him and took him back to the ambulance behind us, and one of the third one jumped through the driver's seat of our van and proceeded to test out that man's suspension on bumpy dirt roads. And we roared down the road after that truck. And the best way to describe our ride down that road the rest of the way was, I think I spent more time with my hair flashing against the top of the van than I did with my rear against the seat I had been sitting on originally. It was quite an interesting ride, to say the least.
Terrifying.
That's terrifying as well. The prayers were flying out of our van at a high rate of speed as well. So we drove down this road. Eventually, we came to like this big circle clearing. The border on one side is that big kind of concrete fence, concrete wall. And
Can I ask a question quick? So where you were driving through like an urban environment, or were you out in the like countryside?
Okay,
were we driving through an urban or a country environment?
Okay, Ben, do the questions from out here need to be repeated, or can they hear them well enough?
They probably, I don't know if they can. I'm actually having some problems getting the microphone connected, so the audio is not the best right now.
Okay, well, Austin, do wasn't repeating it, just try to make sure you do that.
So the question was, were we driving through an urban or a country setting? It was kind of some of both. We drove past some houses, but there was also just some fields and stuff we were driving through. So it was kind of some of both. And we came to this circle clearing eventually, and the circle clearing was bounded on the one side by a big high concrete wall, like 10, 12 feet tall, with barbed wire on top. And the trucks parked there, our van pulled up there. They started with the trucks, went through the trucks, looked at the trucks, talked to the drivers. I'm not sure where they took the drivers, then they came to our van. And there was probably, I'm gonna guess 25 to 30 gangsters in that group that came and surrounded our van. And of course, we weren't exactly sure what to do. We tried to be friendly. They all wanted to look in the windows and say hi. They all wanted to open the sliding door and take a close look at Laura, which was an 8-month-old baby. And they wanted to, and so we tried to be friendly, we smiled, we waved. We didn't really know what they were saying, but it was pretty clear they were trying to decide what they were going to do with us.
Just a question on that, I think I asked you before. It seemed more like this was a crime of opportunity as opposed to being something that was planned out ahead of time.
It seemed like it was, yes, it seemed like it was more a crime of opportunity. We just happened to come along and be one of the three vehicles they took off the road. And once they saw us, they decided that maybe they could try and get some money out of us, and so they decided to keep us. But it took probably a half hour, 45 minutes for them to decide what they were going to do with us, and so we didn't know what was going to happen. I think most of us were expecting the most probable outcome, just for the law, we let it go. And we were okay with that, and none of us really are going to complain that much about that happening. But pretty soon the guards came around and they opened the back doors of the van. I was sitting back with Sam beside me, and Brandon was on the other side of me. And I'll give the names of the people in the room in just a bit. But we were sitting there, and these guys were right behind us. They were talking. I couldn't understand what they were saying. And then this one guy decided he took a liking to the top of my head. He reached in and starts rubbing the top of my head with his hand. Pretty soon another guy's hand comes in. I got two hands rubbing over the top of my head. And I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. Smile and wave, laugh, grin, slap their hands over it. And pretty soon they decided my nose looked like a good thing to do that too as well. And they were rubbing my nose as well. I wasn't quite sure what the point of that was, but it's kind of interesting. And so then eventually they came to a decision about what they wanted to do with us, and the guard or the gangster who had driven us on that ride hopped back in the driver's seat and turned the van around. And at this point, we still had not seen Dale yet. We didn't know where he was. For all we knew, he was gone. I think a fair amount of us were expecting we wouldn't ever see Dale again. And so the gangster hopped in, turned the van around, and just, I mean, the Haitians don't seem to do anything in moderation. He turned and just roared towards that concrete fence. I mean, full speed towards that concrete fence. And I was expecting we were going to crash into the concrete fence. I thought maybe he was going to bail out at the last minute. I wasn't quite sure what he was going to do. But last second, he turned to the right. And we had come in from this side, and he went that way. So I knew that we weren't quite done yet with whatever was going on. So they took us then to the first spot that we were held. And the first spot we were held was a unique situation. We pulled up two buildings with a courtyard in between. In the courtyard was like a small structure built of some tree trunks and tied together. It was kind of like looked like a kind of a hut you build outside, kind of was the idea. And since the logs were tied together, there were these pieces of cloth hanging down. I just didn't remember my first thought pulling in there was, oh, they're just gonna hang so right here. That's kind of my first thought was. But they didn't, thankfully. They decided they asked for our phones and our money and took all our phones and our cash that we had. But they did give most of our wallets back, so we didn't lose. I think there was only one person in our group that lost his wallet. The rest of us got ours back, and they did finally bring Dale back to us at that spot. So we saw Dale was okay. They hadn't done anything else to him. We were all glad about it. Now we're sitting there and did some more talking, and they told us that, you know, if you hide anything from us, we'll kill you. That's what this one guy said. So we decided we weren't going to try and hide anything from them, but somehow 1,500 of their Haitian money, about $15 in US money, slipped through the cracks and ended up going with us into captivity. Somehow they didn't get a hold of that.
So you were not physically searched?
Yeah, some of us were physically searched, but not. I would say not real aggressively. That's fine. Okay. So then they told us to get out of the van. So we got out of the van and they lined us up against the wall of one of the buildings. One of the girls told us later that she was just sure they were just going to gun us all down right there in front of that wall, because the chief, Beanie, was standing there looking at us. There was a guy standing on his right that was videoing us with an iPhone. And then there was another person on his left standing with a big assault rifle of some sort. And we were singing and Beanie told us to be quiet. We kept singing. Albeit somewhat feebly, and finally they had us all go into the second building, and they opened the door and stuffed us all inside the room and shut the door and barred it behind us. And the door was barred by a fence post and a big chunk of concrete was what was barring the door. And just for size comparison, the room we estimated was about a 10 by 12 room. There was 17 stuffed in that room. There was 2 double mattresses in there. And over the course of the afternoon, we did a lot of singing and praying. Not a lot of singing, we did a lot of praying. There wasn't a whole lot of talking that went on. Nobody knew exactly what was going to happen. And we didn't know if we were in here for a day or a week, or if they were going to kill us, or what exactly they were trying to do. So we did a lot of praying, a lot of just thinking. And the guards kept on opening the door and bringing us stuff, which was kind of interesting. First, the door opens and in comes the guards with another mattress. Some of us were sitting on the concrete floor. They wanted us to sit on the mattress. They pulled in a single mattress, and those 3 mattresses pretty well took up all the floor space in that room. And they insisted we all sit down. They didn't want us standing. They all were all supposed to sit down on the mattress, so we did. And then the door closed, and we were left to our thoughts and prayers some more. And pretty soon the door opens again, and in comes a guard with a bag of food.
You should mention the room, they have no windows.
Right.
So it wasn't much.
Yes, I forgot about that. The room had no windows, and the air movement through there was very small. It was very hot. So everybody was sweating. And anyways, the guard comes in with food and tells us we can eat it if we were hungry to have this food. And well, none of us were hungry. I mean, after going through that experience, none of us wanted to eat anything at that time. And so he put it in the center of the room and left. And we continued thinking and praying and probably talking. Maybe we were singing by this point some too. And pretty soon the door opens and in comes Beanie. And he comes in with a cell phone and he wants us to call the cam base. And so either Ryan, and so I'll give the names of the people in our group at this time. So the people in our group were Ryan and Melody Korber. Melody being James and Sherilyn's daughter. And there were 4 single guys. It was me and Sam Stoltzfus, Dale Weidman, Wesley Yoder, and who's the 4th person? What that is for. Me, Sam, Dale, and Wes were the 4 single guys, and then the single lady, Kay Yoder, from Ohio. And then there was a family, Cheryl Noecker from Michigan, and 5 of her children. The oldest being Sherilyn, and then Courtney, Brandon, Sandra, and Sheldon. So, Ryan and Melody's children were named for Andre and Laura. Andre was 3, Laura was 10, Sheldon was 6, Sonia was 14, Brandon was 15, Courtney was 18, and then the rest of us were anywhere from 25 to low 30s. So that was who all was stuffed in this room, and Beanie comes in and tells us he wants us to call Cam. So Ryan or Sam made the call and got a hold of Barry, who's Barry Grant, who's the field director there at the compound. Got a hold of him and talked just a little bit, and then Beanie took over the phone. And his conversation was in Creole, so I didn't understand it all, but the gist of it was that Beanie told Barry they were holding us for ransom. They wanted $1 million apiece for a total of $17 million. And that was about all we heard. And he talked for a little bit more, and then eventually he hung up. And apparently he noticed that we hadn't eaten any of that food in the middle of the room, and apparently he wondered why. We didn't say anything about it. Eventually he left. And we had managed to have just like a 30-second conversation with Barry in English. And so Barry knew that we were all there, we were all together, we were all okay at this point. But that was all we were able to get through.
Do you know if the leader, did he know who Cam was before this thing?
Yeah, the name Cam was familiar to them. So let's see. Eventually, the door opens again, and in comes another person. And this person we nicknamed Santa Claus. That was his nickname, and he spoke English quite well. He wasn't Haitian, but he spoke English quite well. And he came in because I think Beanie thought that we weren't understanding what he was saying. He wanted this guy to come in and find out why we weren't eating. We tried to explain it. They couldn't quite seem to grasp the concept that we were afraid, because I mean, in their minds, we had no reason to be afraid because they weren't out to kill us. That's what this guy said. They were not going to kill us. That was his assurance that he gave us. And he asked us, what kind of food do you want? You want pizza, hamburgers? I mean, what do you want us to get for you? We tried to tell him that this food they brought was fine. We just weren't hungry. But he just didn't quite seem to understand that answer. Because when he left, he informed us that he was going to bring us back some American food. That was what he said when he left. And we still don't know exactly who that person was, how he was connected to the gang. We saw him a total of 3 times. Or 4 times. 4 times. We saw him a total of 4 times. So one thing we had done, when they had called Barry, we memorized his phone number, so if we ever needed it before, ever needed it again, we would know it by memory. So the day wore on and nighttime started coming, and so now we're faced with this reality of trying to sleep 17 people in about a 10 by 12 room on 3 mattresses, 2 doubles, 1 single. So if you do the math, space was quite a problem. And so there were 2 couples in the room, so the 2 couples kind of acted like the buffers between the single ladies and the single guys, as it were, on the mattresses. But there wasn't room for everybody to lay down, so I started the night out in a chair by the door. And I was sitting there. The guards would come and check on us about every hour and a half, something like that, and they didn't quite seem to understand the concept of when you check on somebody sleeping, that you lower the tone of your voice. or the volume of your voice. I mean, they would come in and just gustily talk, and then they would shine the light in everybody's eyes to make sure we were all still there, which is another reason I couldn't quite understand why they couldn't just shine at the ceiling and count us, but some of the stuff that didn't always make sense. So, and that night was quite an interesting night. Eventually, one of the other guys, Wes, asked if I wanted to trade places, and I said sure. So he was on the mattress laying down, I was sitting, so we swapped places. We had to be quick because when he moved, it was just kind of like a wave of the ocean. Everybody else just kind of adjusted to fill the spot he had been in. So I dove in the spot he was in, managed to get there and get my legs stretched out completely, and fell asleep pretty soon. And when I woke up, I wanted to switch back with him, and I pulled my legs out from under a pile of 6 or 7 other legs that were on my feet at that point, and got switched places with him. And just another example of what that night was like. It was either Courtney or Sherilyn said at one point they looked across the room, and there were 5 guys all with their legs straight up on the wall, on their backs, sleeping with their legs straight up on the wall. That was about the only spot to put your legs. You didn't want to be tangled with somebody else's.
And it's probably in the 80 degrees or.
Yeah, when it was probably in the high 80s when the sun went down to something like that. And it didn't cool down a whole lot that night. So it was just a sweaty, sticky, hot night. So the next day was pretty much the same as the first, just sitting in that room, not doing a whole lot. If you had to use the bathroom, they would let you had to knock on the door every time you did the bathroom. They brought water for us, so we had water to drink. And the bathroom, they would let you go out. We did insist that they let the ladies go out 2 at a time, just so the one lady wasn't going out by herself. And they weren't sure about that at first, but eventually they did allow us to do that. And so eventually they, I don't remember what, huh? I'm not quite sure. It was an outhouse in the sense that it was outside, but basically it was 3 curtains against the side of the building, and the curtains may or may not be full of holes. So, and there was just this little trough on the ground you went in, and it ran down the trough and out under the curtains, and I'm not sure what was in there. They were quite interesting. So, and over the next couple of days, I don't remember a whole lot of exciting things happening over the first couple of days, except they did eventually bring a generator, and they brought some fans, some box fans, and oh, I forgot about that. The second night, we were inside the house sleeping, the second night trying to sleep, and it was hot, and the door opens, and in comes a guard with a fan, a battery-powered fan, sets it and turns it so it's blowing on us, which was really nice, but these battery-powered fans on the highest setting would last for about an hour. And he had it blasting around the highest setting, and let us turn it to the lower setting. So it ran out after about an hour. And then he took that fan out and brought in a second one, plopped out and did the same thing, and after another hour, they were out of fans. And so then it was still hot for the rest of the night. And towards the end of the night, they did allow Ryan and Melody to go outside with their children and take the single mattress outside and sleep the rest of the night outside. And then that afternoon of the next day, they brought a 4th mattress. So we did have 4 mattresses total, 3 double, 1 single. And from then on, they let us keep that other double mattress outside and would let about 5 or 6 of us sleep outside or throughout the course of the night. So it was down to 11 people in that room, which was still a lot, but there was room for people to sleep there. And a couple days, maybe a day or so after that mattress, they showed up with 2 couches. One was a full-size couch, and the other was more like a love seat. And so that was kind of strange to see them bring us couches for whatever reason, but they did. And so then we would use those couches to sleep on as well. And then they brought box fans. They wired up wires for lights and fans. They had a fan in the doorway of that room blowing into the room. Then they brought a generator to run the fans at night. And they were doing all kinds to try and be comfortable as what it seemed like. And this first place that we were at was, I have a little bit of a drawing here. I don't know if you can see it very well. You probably can't, but it was 2 buildings. That building had 2 rooms. It was surrounded on all 4 sides by bushes. There were 3 ways in the road we came in, and then a footpath that went off in either direction. So I'm holding it north, south, east, west right here. And there's a footpath that went off this corner and a footpath that went off this corner, and the road went off down here. But those were the only 3 ways into this place. So, talking a little bit about the people in our group just a bit. There were 3 people in our group that talked Creole fairly well. And Ryan and Melody had been in Haiti for a couple months, so they knew a little bit, they communicate a little bit, but they definitely weren't fluent. The 3 people in our group that could communicate the best were Sam and Wes and Kay, the older single lady. They talked fairly well, and thus they were kind of the ones that would tell the guards what we needed, and they were also the ones that would preach to the guards when they got opportunities, especially Sam did a very good job of preaching. And I think just about every guard that came that we hadn't seen before got the gospel preached to him and know in certain terms. And I remember distinctly thinking, so what am I supposed to do in this situation? I don't speak Creole, I can't talk to the guards, what am I supposed to do? And I felt like God told me one time, you know, Austin, you can't speak Creole, that's true, but you can encourage the group. And so I felt like God was wanting me to encourage the group, help people in our group that needed help. If they were feeling down, give them a word of encouragement, pray for them, whatever the case might be. And so that was kind of where I focused my primary energy and effort on doing in our group. So a couple of things that happened at this first place that I'm just going to talk about. And these aren't necessarily in order, because I don't remember the exact order of things. But we saw Santa Claus did eventually come back, and he brought 3 boxes of food. That food included Doritos, peanut butter, sardines, aloe vera, and just all kinds of different stuff. And we were kind of glad to see that. I guess it was nice to have some other food to eat, that's snacks and stuff to eat. And we tried on that time he came back with the food to get him to tell us why we were here, what the gang was after. He didn't say a whole lot that first time. The second time he came back, he told us that that money was not the main objective of this gang. This gang wasn't trying to get money from the government for us. He said their main objective was trying to get their leader of the gang released from prison, because the #1 guy in this gang is in prison with a life sentence. And he said they were trying to use us as leverage to get the government to release him. That's what he said was the main reason. But at the same time, the next time Beanie came around, Sam was preaching to him, and Sam told him he needed to become a Christian. And Beanie said, well, if you give me $13 million, I'll become a Christian. I'll see you in heaven. And Sam gently or forcefully reminded her, told him that's not quite how it works. And so we weren't quite sure who to believe. This other guy said he wasn't a member of the gang, but he was somebody the gang used, somebody who lived in the area the gang used in this role to talk to prisoners and see what they wanted, what they needed, that kind of stuff. So we weren't exactly sure what his role was or who he was.
So you said this guy brought some food in, but what was the normal food every day you got? Like
Normal food we got every day, so it did vary a little bit, but normally in the morning for breakfast, and breakfast came anywhere from 9 to 2 would be breakfast, and it was most often spaghetti cooked in fish oil, not tomato based spaghetti, but fish oil based spaghetti. I personally liked it. I thought it was okay. I mean, you did get tired day after day to have spaghetti for breakfast, but every now and then he would bring something different. A couple times he brought eggs, like scrambled eggs and bread and avocados. Supper was almost always rice and beans with some kind of sauce. Sometimes it was just white rice, but it was always rice of some sort. And then the sauce would either be like once again, a fish sauce, or sometimes it was like cooked vegetables to put over the rice. And a couple times he brought like chicken sauce to put over the rice.
no lunch?
No lunch. 2 meals a day. And then eventually towards the end, they started bringing us another thing for breakfast. Sometimes it was kind of like a maize, cornmeal mush maize combination. It looked like cornmeal mush, except you could actually see the individual corn kernels. It was okay for variety, but it wasn't one of my favorites as far as that went. But they never seemed to quite bring enough food for 17 people, and so hence that's probably one reason why I lost 20 pounds, and some other people in our group lost quite a bit of weight as well. I think just the 4 single guys that were down there, I think between the four of us, we lost just about 100 pounds total. Collectively. All right, so
And you just had water to drink, there was no.
occasionally he would bring like juice, and sometimes he brought some pop and stuff for us, but it was, the majority was just water for drinking.
You were able to drink most of it.
Right, like they would bring bags of water, these little square bags of water that had been purified so it was safe to drink. No, it tastes good. It might taste like gas, it tastes like bark mulch, it might taste like stale water, but it wasn't bad for you as far as that went. Okay, the shower was quite different as well. The shower consisted of taking a bucket of water into this spot where you would originally we used for a bathroom. They did eventually build like an actual bathroom, and three sides was surrounded by curtains that were about so high, and then the other side was facing the bushes. So that was where the toilet eventually moved to, and the shower became more of a shower. You took a bucket into that shower, and a bucket of water, and then there was a metal scoop that you would scoop water out of the bucket and dump it over you to bring you to get yourself wet. And then they had soap, no shampoo, they had soap. You would soap yourself up and then rinse yourself off, and then generally put your clothes back on you've just been wearing after somebody washed them, after you washed them or somebody else washed them for you. And so then you just let them dry out throughout the course of the day. And especially for the ladies, that's what they had to do. The guys, they did eventually bring us a bag of clothes, so we could generally find another pair of pants to wear while our jeans were drying on the line. But the ladies always had to put their wet dresses back on after they had taken a shower. Okay, so that's the shower. And there were a couple people in the group that did start keeping diaries. We had one pen that somebody had taken with them. They did start keeping diaries. Unfortunately, the ink on that pen ran out about the end of November, 28 or 27 or something like that, and we did not get another pen until December 12 or 13. We asked the guards for one, but they wouldn't give us another pen to replace the one that ran out. A couple other things that happened at this first spot. One day, Cheryl, which would be the 48-year-old mom that was there, got some kind of an infection somewhere in her gut. Like she had a tremendous gut ache. She couldn't find any comfortable position to lay in. Standing wasn't comfortable, laying down wasn't comfortable, sitting wasn't comfortable, and it really hurt. And she was pretty sure she had an infection of some sort. We had nothing to treat infections. The only kind of medicinal stuff we had were some Band-Aids and like a soothing ointment, but that was about it. And so our options when somebody came down with something were quite limited. Basically, all we did was pray. And I say that not saying that prayer isn't important. Prayer is important because that day we prayed for Cheryl. We gathered around her, put our hands on her, prayed for her, and she went to bed that night. She slept well. And the next morning she felt 100%. She was still a little weak, but she felt 100%. The pain was gone. So that was one thing that happened one time where God did a miraculous miracle. And he did lots of miracles through this time, and there'll be more stories about that. Now, as far as the guards were quite interesting. We nicknamed all the guards. One night, Wes and I were laying there trying to go to bed, and he said, we really should give these guards nicknames so we can talk about them without them knowing who we're talking about. Because they had told us some of their names, so we could say their names, we could talk about them using their names, but they would always know we were talking about them. And we were talking in English, they didn't understand English, and so they would kind of get suspicious about some things. And so we started coining nicknames for the guards. And in the first spot, we had I'm just going to give these nicknames. We had hashtag earmuffs, Charlie Horse, Henry, Archie, and Carrot Top. Carrot Top was given that name because he's the only Haitian I've seen with orange hair. And then the chief of the guards, the guy who was in charge of the guards, we didn't give him a nickname till later, but that nickname, once we gave it to him, stuck like a piece of tape. And his nickname was Ping. And it comes from the story about Ping the yellow duck. I don't know if you've ever read that story, but Ping's owner had those 3 ponytails sticking up his head. Well, one time our Ping, the guard, came around and he had that exact same hairdo, so he got nicknamed Ping. And that name stuck. And then I think that was about all the guards that we saw at that place. I mean, there were more guards there, But in this first location, there was a tarp that was on the east side of that courtyard that blocked us from seeing what went by on the road. So we didn't see all the guards, and the guards would normally stay on the other side of the tarp. There would normally be one guard sitting on a chair watching us. And so we don't know how many were there total, but of the ones we saw, it looked like there was probably about 5 or 6 guards that were there on a regular basis. And so we gave them all nicknames to that spot. And as far as
Were the guards armed or?
the guards were armed, we found out later they had 3 guns between the 6 of them. They had a pistol that was most commonly found stuck in somebody's underwear. That was their holster. And then they had a shotgun with a bent barrel that was held together with a zip tie. And then they had an older version assault rifle, some smaller assault rifle that looked like it actually might work if you pulled the trigger. I mean, the shotgun probably looked like it would work too, but no guarantee where the shell would go. And they didn't know how to handle their guns. I mean, who sticks a pistol in their underwear? Except the Haitian gangster. There might be other people who do too. But anyways, they clearly didn't know how to handle their guns. And they tried to intimidate us with their guns, and it didn't really work. And I think that kind of irritated them at first. I mean, in their mind, they had the guns, so we should be scared of them, but we weren't scared of them. And they found that out pretty soon. They didn't always watch us, but they learned pretty soon to respect us and they give us our space. They never tried to physically harm any of us, or never tried to do anything to any of the ladies, which we were very grateful for. I believe that was God looking out for us in that regard as well. Because I know there were times where things happened where they wanted to hurt us. I know that. But they never were able to. One thing they did do, the guards all loved the children. There is that thing about children that no matter, even a Haitian gangster can't help but love an 8-month-old baby that just smiles at everybody. And so they loved the children, especially Laura, Andre, and Sheldon. And one thing Ryan and Melody especially asked us to do is just don't let the gangsters hold Andre and Laura. They can talk to them, but don't let them hold them. So we tried to keep them from holding the children. But one thing they did like to do is they like to fist bump the children. And their fist bump would be a fist bump where they would bump their fist and they would tap their heart twice with their fist. And we didn't really think a whole lot about that, but I found out since I've come back to the States that actually fist bumping actually originated in gangs. That whole thing of fist bumping actually started in gangs. And we started to wonder if that was actually a good or a bad thing, this fist bumping they were doing. Because one night, Ryan and Melody were talking with Andre, and Andre was just insisting that our town runner, the guy that brought us our food and water for washing and water for drinking, whose name was Mackinson. Andre was just insisting that Mackinson was a good man. And Ryan and Melody were telling him that no, he's not a good man, he's a gangster. But Andre was just convinced that he was a good man, and Ryan wondered if that fist bumping had something to do with that. He wondered if maybe Satan was using that as an avenue to try and get into the children's lives. So eventually they put a stop to that and told Andre, no more fist bumping. If you fist bump the guards, you gotta spank him. And they asked us as a group to, if you see Mackinson coming, just make sure that Andre is beside Ryan or Melody when he's around. So that was kind of the guards and kind of how they were to us. They tried to be helpful, but their trying to be helpful sometimes got more in the way than it was helpful. But they did try to be helpful. They tried to make sure we were comfortable, tried to do stuff for us, but they we weren't always thankful for, because sometimes it was a little irritating. Because it seemed like whenever they wanted to rewire something, they would always wait till it was nighttime to do it. And while we were trying to sleep. Just for example. So our daily routine of what the day consisted of, we'd get up in the morning, and we'd always have a time of singing and prayer in the morning, sometimes longer than others. And then breakfast came anywhere from 9 to 2. We would pray again at 1 o'clock. And then at the afternoon, we would take showers, wash clothes, talk, whatever it might be. Supper was anywhere from 4 to 8. And then before we went to bed, we had another time of singing and prayer, or sometimes we just prayed before we went to bed. We didn't always sing before we went to bed, but often we would sing there as well. That was pretty much the daily routine that it consisted of, and the guards wouldn't let us do a whole lot else as far as that goes. We asked them if could we make our own food. could we do some stuff? But no, they didn't really want us. They just wanted us to sit. And so we sat and took our time of a lot with just talking, learning to know each other, talking about telling stories, talking about books, that kind of stuff. So one night we were there praying. We had just finished our time of prayer, and Mackinson comes driving in his pickup. He gets out and tells Sam we're being moved, that they're moving us to a second location. And so we begin to start loading everything into the back of that pickup, mattresses, fans, everything, couches. And then they leave with all that stuff, and they drove. We timed it was about 45 minutes by the time we got back. And we gathered in a group. We were singing, we were praying. Because earlier while we were there, one afternoon, I think it was the afternoon that Cheryl was dealing with a not feeling well, I think. She was laying on the mattress we had outside, and God gave her a vision of an angel coming and taking us out of that camp through the bushes, just parting the bushes, and we just follow that angel out back to camp. She had a vision of that. And so, remember that night we were singing and praying, waiting for Max to come move us, and we all were thinking that this has got to be the night God's going to come deliver us, because they want to move us, but God isn't going to let them move us. He's going to take us out of here. I remember distinctly thinking that myself, but God did allow them to move us.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So, you were talking about at the beginning, like right when they were captured and brought up, how there were a number of people were scared for their life.
Mm-hmm.
As you were at that first place, how did kind of the mentality of the group, like, were you guys afraid? I mean, or were there some afraid? Were you like, at this point, okay, they don't want to hurt us, it's just a matter of time? Or like, what kind of was were people's mindset?
Right. So the question, were we afraid by this point that they were going to either kill us or just were keeping us there for a time? For me personally, it was probably about the fourth or fifth day, I was pretty convinced they weren't going to hurt us. Because you don't bring 3 boxes of food and couches and fans to people that you're planning on killing. So I was pretty sure that they were planning on keeping us here until whatever they were trying to do was successful. The negotiations that were going on were successful. And I think most people in our group felt about the same by that point. But I do remember the night of the move, I wasn't sure. I was a little bit nervous about where they're taking us. Are they taking us to another spot, or were they taking us somewhere to kill us or to let us go? I mean, the fact they moved all the stuff was a pretty good indication they were taking us to another spot, but what for? There was definitely some nervousness that night of the move. So the second place we were moved to was, in my opinion, a better place, a nicer place to stay at. The house was bigger. There was 4 rooms instead of 2. The shower had a roof, which the other one did not. And as far as the terrain went, instead of being surrounded by bushes on all 4 sides, it was surrounded by fields. Like, there would have been absolutely nothing to keep us from walking off and leaving except for the guards. It would have been very easy to walk out of there. The one downside was, if you were going to do that, you would need probably about 5 minutes or so before you could actually get out of sight in any direction. And a couple things, so kind of, and these are kind of in order, a little bit more so on the second place, but the first night we were there, second night we were there, Beanie shows up with a box full of medicine. I knew a box full of medicine. There were boxes of Benadryl, there was some ibuprofen stuff. There was a special medicine for, actually, I forgot another couple that was on our group. Matt and Rachel Miller were also in our group, and Matt was someone who has a physical ailment that he's had since he was a small child, and this ailment he has requires him to be on medicine that he takes every week. And that medicine was back in the base. So he had no medicine for about 3 weeks. He missed about 3 other shots, and his body was really feeling it. Basically, what he has is something that his immune system is working all the time, about 5 times the normal rate that a normal person's immune system is working. So he tires his body out, and the medicine he would take would help suppress his immune system and get it back to more a normal person's immune system. So it would give him more energy. And so he hadn't had this for 3 weeks or so. It was about 3 weeks at the first spot till they moved us. And we had told the guards and Beanie a couple times that he needed this medicine. The one time Beanie had asked him to write the name of the stuff down, so Matt had, but Matt told him, he said, this is prescription only medicines you can only get in the United States. He said, you're not going to be able to get it without a prescription. And Beanie said he'd see what he can do, and well, he showed up at this spot with, it wasn't the exact medicine that Matt was looking for, but it was something kind of like it. It was a prescription only medicine from the United States that he showed up with, was in that box as well. So at this new spot, we had a couple more guards join the rotation. We had someone we nicknamed Zigzag, who Zigzag was a person that I think about quite a bit. I still pray for him. I still pray for all the guards, but especially him, because he was the kind of person that if God would ever get a hold of his life and he would become a Christian, he would be willing to do anything for anyone at any time, no matter what. He's that kind of person. If you wanted something like coconuts and mangoes, just ask him, he can do his best to get it for you. Because the second place we stayed at had coconut trees surrounding it and some mango trees close by as well. And another guard that showed up there was a guard called Rookie, and that's what we called him. He had been with the gang for about a month, and so he was still fairly new. And then another guard joined that we nicknamed Attitude, for the simple reason that he thought he was quite an impressive guy. So one thing they did bring the generator over there to that second spot along with the fans and wired everything up for us again. But right about the time we moved over here the first time, and the question might wonder, why will we move the first time? We don't know exactly, but there were two things that happened. And so we were moved twice. There were two things that happened that we suspect kind of coincided with us moving these two times. The one thing that happened was the negotiations were turned over from CAM to the FBI at one point. And the second thing that happened is the Haitian radio claimed that 400 U.S. troops had landed in Haiti at one point. Don't know if that's true or not, but those two things seem to coincide with us getting moved both times. I'm not sure which one was first, which one was second, I don't remember. So, where was I at? Yeah, he did take it, and Matt did take that medicine, and it helped by not letting it get any worse, but it didn't actually get better. But it didn't let it get any worse. So it wasn't quite right, but it was working in the sense it was just kind of holding it where it was at. So the generator, they brought the generator over because of us getting kidnapped, and there was huge unrest and protests all across Haiti. Haiti had a tremendous gas shortage. So the second spot, they couldn't always find gas for the generator. So one day they showed up with a ginormous solar panel. Who knows where they stole that from, but probably from somewhere. And they set this solar panel up on the roof of one of the houses and wired the solar panel up to 4 car batteries, would charge it during the day and run the fans at night off the batteries. And they would run for about 5 or 6 hours. Then they would run out of battery, as long as it got a full charge. If it didn't get a full charge, then you had no fans. And there were a couple nights where it did not get any charge because something was malfunctioning on the solar panel throughout the course of the day, and thus there were a couple nights where we had no fans and it was quite warm. But more on that in just a bit. No, actually, now would be the time for that story. So the one night in particular, I remember this one distinctly. We went to bed, the solar panels hadn't charged anything, so it was just hot in there. And the guards would not let us have any windows or doors open. They would refuse to let us have any windows or doors open. And thus there was like no breeze moving through there unless there were fans running to keep the air moving. So it was hot, stifling, swimming. I assume it probably stank, but we were all pretty used to each other's smell because they had not given us deodorant in 3 weeks. And they didn't give us deodorant the whole time we were there. So we probably hadn't gotten used to the stinky smell and all that. But so I'm laying there, and this building had 3 rooms we slept in. The one room was a shower. And Ryan and Melody and their children slept in one room on the one mattress, and then single guys slept in another room, and then Matt and Rachel and all the other ladies and all the other ladies except Melody slept in the other room. And all these rooms were all bigger than the room at the first spot, so there was more space. You actually had room to lay out, stretch out, as it were. As long as you didn't mind playing footsie with the person across the room from you, that was fine. And in that kind of a situation, you just kind of made do the best you possibly could. So we are laying there trying to go to sleep, and I was laying
kind of in the doorway between the room where the guys were sleeping and the room where the ladies and Matt were sleeping. And right on the other side in that doorway, there was an open spot where there were no mattresses. And Cheryl's oldest daughter, Sherilyn, had started sleeping there on that concrete because she didn't like sleeping on a mattress where there was 4 people. There wasn't room, and so she moved and she was just sleeping on that concrete floor. So she was in there, I was on the other side of the door. And that night we were laying there, we were trying to go to sleep, all of us. And I don't know if everybody was successful. I wasn't very successful going to sleep. And so I'm laying there trying to go to sleep, sweating, feeling like I'm laying in a bathtub. And I just got to the point where I was just fed up with this. And I rolled over on my stomach and I was going to start praying. And I had a list of complaints. I was fully prepared to just let God have it with both barrels and start complaining about why is this happening? But before I started, I looked into the other room, and Sherilyn was sitting up against the wall, and I could tell she either I think she'd just been praying or something. And so just before I started praying, I just asked her, I said, are you all melting in there yet? And she leaned over and she told me, she said, I'm just imagining that we're in a refining fire. That was her comment. And it set me back on my heels a little bit, and I thought about that. And I did eventually end up praying. The interesting thing is the only thing that came out of my mouth was just thanksgiving and praise to God for what He's done so far. Because I realized that I had no reason to complain. God had taken care of us. Yes, the conditions were not ideal, but He was taking care of us. And so it kind of helped me get my perspective right, and to the point where I realized that we had to focus on the good things, not the bad things. If we focus on our circumstances, we get discouraged. And it was also that Sherilyn told me later that she had told God that she had basically surrendered her right to God to be free. At 1 o'clock each afternoon, we had eventually taken that prayer time and specifically started praying at 1 o'clock for deliverance, and pretty much for deliverance alone. That was our time of prayer of deliverance. And she told me that night that she had surrendered her right to God to be free. And so basically it was, in her mind, it was up to God to do to get us out of there when He wanted, when He planned, however He wanted to do it. And I thought about that for a long time because I was awake till about 4 o'clock that morning until I finally fell asleep. And I thought about that quite a bit. And I think by the end of that night, I was able to pray that same prayer to God and just say, God, it's up to you. And I'm just going to do what you've asked me to do here and let you take care of the details of getting us out. And that was really, really freeing for me personally, because now I no longer had to worry or wonder how long it was going to be. I knew it was all in God's hands, all in His timing. He was going to get us out the way, in whatever way He saw fit, whatever time it was. So that was, I tell that story because for me, that was an important night because it helped get my perspective in the right spot. The next thing that started happening to us that we couldn't quite understand was one day we were praying at 1 o'clock, and we're there praying, and I hear a plane fly over, which was a huge abnormality because both places we stayed at were like almost right in line with the flight path of any major passenger jet coming from Port-au-Prince Airport. So we would always see these big commercial jets coming in a couple times a day. But this plane sounded like a smaller plane, and I kept hearing. So I started looking up in the sky, and up above us, I saw a plane that was doing figure eights over top of us, doing figure eights. And we didn't know exactly what that was, but that every day that plane would be up there doing figure eights. There were 2 different kinds of planes we saw, and every day they were up there. And eventually they just started circling us, and we were almost always right in the middle of their circle. We didn't know who they were. We didn't know what they were doing. We hoped that that meant somebody had found us and something was happening, but we didn't know. And all we could do was guess. And in case anybody wonders, I believe those planes were the FBI circling us, just watching, making sure that we were okay, they weren't harming us, they were taking care of us properly, and so on. Another nickname for another guard that we had, actually this other guard I think was the second in command of the gang, is what we kind of had figured out. Because he would come, he had less authority than me, but he had more authority than anybody else that we saw. And we nicknamed him Papa Wheelie Chief, was his nickname. And the reason for that nickname was he always came on a motorcycle, and he always would try and pop a wheelie for us when he left. He was so ambitious about trying to do that that he almost decapitated himself on our clothesline one time trying to do it for us. So he came to the second spot one day. And one thing we had been praying about quite a bit is we had been asking God to just totally disrupt the work of this gang, to not let their plans work or anything. And, you know, just whatever they would try and do would come to nothing. And so he came one day and he walks over to where we were, and he had a wound on his shoulder. There's a big wound on his shoulder that looked really, really painful. And he told Sam that he had a motorcycle accident the day before. And I remember thinking to myself, was that an accident or was that God? I believe it was God, but that's just surmising on my part, but just simply because of what we were praying for. I believe God was answering our prayers, because the reason I believe that is Sam asked this chief, he said, when are we going to leave? And this chief said, well, he said, if it was up to me, you'd be gone by now. But he said, it's not up to me. So the next two stories actually would illustrate a lot in my mind about the kind of spiritual warfare that we had there. We were not kidnapped because we were Christians. We're not being held there because we were Christians, because of our faith per se. Our faith had led each of us down to Haiti, but we weren't there because we were Christians, as far as that's not why the gang had kidnapped us. But one morning, Sam was outside praying early, and some of us would generally get up early in the morning, go watch the sunrises. The sunrises and sunsets were beautiful at that second spot. You could watch the sun come up behind palm trees and then set down behind palm trees in the evening. So it was really, really nice to watch those, just watch God's hand paint the sky every night and every morning. Because this one morning, Sam had come out, and he was on the other side of the house from where 4 or 5 of us were watching the sunrise. And he was praying, and Mackinson showed up. And Mackinson walked over to a tree beside where Sam was standing. And he reached down, and Sam saw there was this black bag standing on the ground. And Mackinson screwed the lid on something inside that black bag. And then he saw Sam watching him. And he told Sam, he said, this is Satan's bag. He said, don't touch it, or Satan will hurt you. And so Sam came back over to where the rest of us were, and he told us about what had happened. And he asked me, he said, well, what would you do in that situation? And I said, I'd take that ball and throw it out in the field as far as I can. And so he said, let's go do that then. So me and Sam and Dale and Brandon went over there, and we picked the bottle up, and we prayed over the bottle, prayed to God, and just bind whatever power was in that bottle. In the name of Jesus, I took the bottle and threw it out in the field as far as I could. And then for the rest of the day, we were just waiting to see what would happen when Mackinson came back, because we knew he'd come back in the evening and check that bottle again. And so we knew there was probably going to be a confrontation of some sort that evening, but we didn't know exactly what was going to happen. We did know that God would take care of it. So yes, evening came around, and Mackinson, pretty soon he came back. I saw him coming. We were praying, I think, at that time. He came back, first thing, he walked over to that tree. And pretty soon, the other guards over there, and they're shining their flashlights around. They're looking for something. Well, I knew what they were looking for. And it took a little bit, but Mackinson did eventually put 2 and 2 together, and he comes walking over to our group. When he started coming over to our group, we started singing. And we sang. And as soon as one song was done, someone would start another song. And we sang, and we sang. We sang for quite a while. And Mackinson just sat there and listened to us. He would, every now and then, he'd mutter some stuff under his breath, but he was quite calm, considering the circumstances while we were singing. Eventually we got done singing, and Sam said, all right, he said, let's go inside. He told us. So we gathered everything up we needed for it. We started heading inside, and Mackinson got up from where he was sitting and walked over and stood right in front of the door. The doorway that led onto the porch. He walked over and stood right in front of that doorway.
Did you tell them that you suspected this man was a witch doctor?
No, I hadn't said that at this point. But yeah, we suspected from this incident and a couple other things that happened, this guy was some kind of a witch doctor or something like that. And so he was not planning on letting all of us in the house, particularly he was not going to let Sam in the house. For some reason, probably because he spoke Creole the best, Sam was pinned by the guards as the chief of our group. And thus anything we did that they didn't like was automatically blamed on him. And so even though I had thrown the bottle, he got blamed for destroying that bottle. because I think the bottle had broke or the lid had popped off and hit the ground. Whatever was in the bottle spilled out. And so Mackinson starts yelling at Sam, and Ping comes over and is yelling at Sam, and Ping's telling Sam, don't you know that I can shoot you? And he cocks his pistol to illustrate the point. And Sam says, sure, go ahead. And he said, go ahead. It's not really, all you'll do is send me to heaven. And they were yelling, and we were all praying. By this point, Melody and the children were inside. I think Cheryl and Sheldon got inside, and the rest of the single ladies were on the porch. And the guys were all still out in the yard. And Maxon was there yelling, Ping was there yelling. And Sam was also, I don't know if Sam was yelling, but a couple times he was rebuked Satan, because like I said, we believe this guy was a witch doctor, and Satan was definitely there that night. And anyways, and the situation was getting quite tense. And the interesting thing is that this night, Melody said she saw an angel that night. She saw an angel circling our group. She didn't see it very long, but she saw it a couple times, sort of like flying around our group. I forgot to tell that detail when I told that to the rest of the family. But yeah, that was one thing she did say. So we were praying that God would protect us, that God would show us power, just do anything to help the situation, because I knew that Mackinson was mad enough that he would probably do just about anything. I knew he wanted to hurt Sam. He probably wanted to hurt the rest of us too, but especially Sam, because he was the one that he held responsible. And he kept taking a step towards Sam, just one step at a time. Then he'd shout and yell some more. Eventually, Brandon and Ryan stepped up beside Sam, and I think, did they put their arms around him or just stood beside him? I forget what it was, but when they stepped up there, Mackinson stopped. He didn't go any farther. And he stopped like right beside West. And West also spoke Creole quite well, but he wasn't quite as quick to preach as Sam was. He had the vocabulary to do it, he just wasn't quite as quick to do it. Because he put his hand on Mackinson's shoulder and he said, Mackinson, he said, you need to be set free. And that like took the wind out of Mackinson's sails. And West said it in a very calm, gentle way. And Mackinson answered him in about the same tone of voice, like his anger was gone, at least for the time being. And so West said a couple things to him. I didn't understand the conversation, but got him to calm down. And then I think Sam said something and he got riled back up again. And then they just kind of calmed him down a little bit, to the point where he was a little bit calm. He was still angry, I think, but he wasn't quite as upset. And then eventually, by this point, he had moved away from the door, and Sam said, let's all go inside. So we all went inside. He didn't try and stop us, but he came in with us and told Sam that he wanted Sam to come back outside. And we all said, no, Sam is not coming back outside. If you want to say something to him, you can say it to him right here in this room. And about that time, another guard, who we nicknamed Eeyore, because he had about as much upstairs as Eeyore does, he came in the room and asked us for cookies. Don't know exactly why the cookies had to do with this situation, but I think he felt like the situation was getting a little bit tense, and that was his way of defusing. He was trying to get cookies from us for whatever reason. We did, so we gave him some cookies. And so Mackinson would eventually walk out of the room and leave us there. And everybody went to bed except for us 4 single guys and Cheryl's children, 4 oldest or 3 oldest. And we were in that room we prayed and sang for quite a number of hours in that room until we felt at peace that God was going to take care of us the rest of the night, and we all went to bed. And we slept the rest of the night with no other instances. But that was one time where Mackinson wanted to hurt us. And I think he would have, except I think God kept him from it. So another thing that happened that made us pretty certain that Mackinson was involved in witchcraft or a witch doctor of some sort is one night we were getting ready to go to bed, and we heard these drums pounding in the distance and people chanting and yelling in the distance. We didn't really think a whole lot about this. I did. But we went to bed that night, we slept. The next day, we were getting ready to go to bed, and the drums were louder. It made me think of the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel, when priests were going around the altar for Baal. They started out calm, and nothing happened. They got louder and louder and more rowdy. That's kind of what the impression I got about music. was that something satanic was going on, and that first night hadn't been successful, and thus they were trying to up the as it were, yeah, and so on. And so that next night it was closer, it was louder. Then the third night, we had just gone to bed, and I wasn't sleeping in the doorway that night. I was sleeping on the other side of the room, and we're laying there, and all of a sudden I hear music coming in the distance, or we hear music playing in the distance. I didn't really think a whole lot about it, but it kept getting closer and closer. And pretty soon I realized that this is a vehicle's radio that I'm hearing. This vehicle's coming towards the house. And the vehicle comes towards the house and stops right outside the wall. And the door's open and the radio is turned on full blast and just bellowing out this absolute horrible music, satanic music. And I was awake at this point, and I sat up and I looked into the room where the ladies were sleeping, and I saw that Cheryl was awake and Sharon was awake, and I figured they were probably praying, so I moved over there to join them in praying. And about that time, Matt and Rachel woke up, and so all 5 of us started praying together against this music that was just 10 feet away on the other side of the wall, just blaring away. And the interesting thing about that is that Melody heard, she heard Mackinson and a lady. She don't know exactly who the lady was, but they were outside there and they were yelling. And she said she heard the name Sam Stoltzfus, she heard Cam, and then she heard they just were screaming this one word over and over and over, and that word was fall, 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 just over and over. And so we were pretty sure that they were trying to put some kind of curse on us, or at least on Sam for sure, and Cam. So we prayed. We were inside the house praying. They were outside screaming. The music was blaring. We prayed for probably about 3.5 hours, just praying that God would take care of us, would whatever curse they were trying to put on us wouldn't work, and that He would shut that music off. And after about 3.5 hours, the music shut off just like that. And of course, in our mind, that was an answered prayer. Well, God had used Wesley to answer that prayer because Wes had woke up, heard the music, walked over to the door, told Payne, go shut that music off, and Payne got up and went over in the lodge and shut the music off. So we prayed for a little longer, and then once again we all felt at peace about the night, and went back to sleep and slept for the rest of the night without any issues. So another instance about where I think that God showed His power and kept us safe, and nothing happened to us. As far as if they tried to curse us, nothing happened. One thing that did happen is that a couple of us started getting some small health issues at this point. Wes was having, something was happening on his feet. He had like a really bad case. He thought it probably started as a really bad case of athlete's foot, but it got to the point where there were like sores on his feet with pus in them, and his feet just really didn't look that well. He didn't tell anybody about it, but one day I walked into the room and he was looking at them, and I saw them, and I walked back outside and said, guys, we need to do something about Wes's feet. We need to pray for them, and if there's anything else we can do, we need to do it, because they did not look good. So we prayed. We asked the guards to get us some antibiotic cream, but they didn't quite seem to understand what that was, because they brought us skin lightening cream. And so it kind of left us with 2 options. We could pray, which was a good option. We did. We prayed about every day for his feet. But something that Cheryl had learned when her family was over in Kenya for 7 years is that if you take if you take ashes, you make a fire, and then take the wood ashes from a fire and put that in a pot of water, and then soak your feet or whatever is in there that is infected, the ash acts like a natural drawing salve, because it's lye-based, so it'll draw out infection. So for probably a week and a half or 2 weeks, we would build a fire every day and boil water, and then put ashes in it, and Wes would soak his feet for 15 or 20 minutes in that water. And his feet did slowly heal. It didn't heal immediately, but it did slowly heal as a result of that and God working. We could get them from the guards, yeah. That's one thing they would give us. I think it's really exciting. And so they would let us build the fire. At first, they were a little bit uncertain about that, but we convinced them to let us build a fire. And once we convinced them, they were okay with that. They just wanted us to tell them when we needed wood, and they would get wood for us.
But this is all before any of the ones you released, right?
All before, we haven't got that yet. Nope.
So the other thing is you talked about you guys walk outside and inside, so like, how's the security at this point? So there's field, so, but you can go out of the house at will?
The security at this point was best described by this. So one morning, a couple of us went outside to watch the sunrise, and we got outside, and I started looking around and realized there's no guards. And so I walked around the house and realized that all the guards were either asleep or not there. And the idea of escaping or running away had come up in our group at this point. And there were some people that were in favor of it, and some people that were not in favor of it. And you might ask, where was I? I'll tell you where I was. I was not in favor of escaping, and I tended to be quite vocal about it. And so this morning, I didn't tell anybody else about what I had seen about the guards. Or I think I just told a couple people. Well, the other people heard about it, and they said, if that happens again, wake everybody up, and maybe that's the morning God wants us to walk out. Well, guess what? The next morning it happened again. I went outside early, no guards. Ping was the only guard that was around, and he was in another one of the buildings at that spot sleeping. And so everybody else woke up, and they decided that maybe this was the morning God wanted us to walk out of there. And so they prayed about it. And it's about 7:30. They started praying, and they decided that by 7:45, if none of the guards had come back or were awake, we were going to walk out. That's what they decided. So we were waiting. We got everything ready. 7:45 rolls around. We walked 4 watches, so we could keep track of the time. 7:45 rolls around. Sam came out of the house, said, 7:45, let's go. And I looked across the field, and here come 2 guards walking across the field. So not that morning. But that's.
And you had changed your mind at this point?
Huh?
You had changed your mind at this point?
I had come to the point where I was able to say, God, if you want us to walk out, I'll go. But if you don't want us to walk out, then please stop us. And he stopped us very effectively. But that was kind of what security was like at this second spot by now. The guards would spend most of the day, they didn't always watch us anymore. They would spend most of the day just drinking, goofing off, whatever it was. And so playing on their phones, talking to ladies on their phones. They spent so much time on their phones.
So were they drinking and drugs and stuff going on?
Yeah, they would do that too.
Change their behavior when they were high or drunk?
Not as much as I thought it would be, probably because they'd done it so much that the drugs and alcohol didn't affect them so much at that point, but it did a little bit. And so that was our first attempt at walking out, first attempt at kind of laying a fleece before God, saying, is this what you want us to do? And God answered in a very miraculous and right on time. That was the amazing part. It was 7:45 on the dot when I saw those 2 guards coming across the field. And so that pretty much is all the interesting things that happened from that second place we were held. We did get moved again, and it was very similar to the first move. Mackinson came and told Sam we're moving. They loaded everything up in 2 pickups, took off. We timed them again. It was about an hour that they were gone. And they came back and got us, crammed 17 people into 2 pickups in the cabs, plus the 2 drivers. There was 19 people crammed in 2 pickup cabs. Quite an interesting arrangement there. I think there was 9 or 10 people just in my pickup cab alone.
Have the planes continued?
The planes have been
Did the
circling us.
guards have any, I mean, was there any?
They didn't seem to see the planes for whatever reason. I don't know why. But there had been a passenger jet that had come over really low, and they had tried to shoot at it. Like a commercial passenger jet had come over really low, and one of the guards went running out there with a shotgun, trying to cock it to get a shot at this plane. He cocked it, and the shell fell out on the ground. And by the time he got it up and in the gun, the plane was already too far away to take a shot at it. Right. But I don't think they had seen the planes that were circling us way above. If they did ignore them. So we got moved. We climbed into those pickups, and we moved back to the exact same spot we had been at first. But it was a little bit different because the whole house was ours now. When we had been there before, there had been 11 other people being held hostage in that other room. There were 2 rooms, and 11 other people had been in that room. There were 17 in our room. Those 11 people had all left, or had been taken somewhere else, or had been released. And thus we had the whole house to ourselves. And so now the sleeping conditions were a little bit better. We had a little bit more room. Once again, it was great as long as you didn't mind playing footsie or sharing a single mattress with another guy. As long as you were okay with either one of those, sleeping conditions were bearable. But the first day that we got back, we went back at night. We slept one night there. That next afternoon, Matt got sick. I don't remember the name, what he said about it, but he said that he had this kind of an infection once before. He ended up having to go to the emergency room, and the doctors had told him that this kind of infection got about 18 hours before it becomes potentially life-threatening. And so we told the guards got in contact with Papa. I think King got in contact with Papa Wheelie Chief. Papa Wheelie Chief came to look at him. And then Papa Wheelie Chief called Beanie, and pretty soon Beanie shows up. And for the first time, Beanie was a kind of the person who he showed absolutely zero emotion. I've never seen such a stone cold emotionless expression in his face when he was with us, unless he was laughing at Sam's preaching. But this day he came to look at Matt. Like there was actually, you actually could see just a little bit of concern on his face that had not been there before, because he came in the house and Cheryl told him, she said, hurry, do something. He's like, okay, I will, or something like that. And he looked at Matt, and then later they told us that, told Sam or told us that Matt and Rachel were going to be allowed to go out tonight. They were going to let them go tonight. So we prayed for Matt. That was once again all we could do to help his ailment there. All we could do was pray. So we prayed. Pretty soon in the evening, about 7:30ish or something like that, 6 vehicles pulled into the place. We carried Matt out, put him in one of the pickups. Rachel got in beside him. The driver of that was, I didn't see this guy, but some of the other guys did. They said he was not a gang member. So he was a third party or something. I'm pretty sure. How old were Matt and Rachel? I want to say in their high 20s.
They just been married on real long.
I think they were younger than the rest of the people.
Maybe they were younger. I'm not sure.
I would say a little bit more, not even higher.
I'm not sure how old. They had been married for some time. They didn't have any children yet. They had been married. Miller. They're from Ohio. So we loaded Matt up. Rachel got in. The rest of us went back in the house, and all of a sudden, Payne comes flying into the house, informing us all that we all need to go outside. He said, "Don't worry about putting your shoes on. Just go outside." So we went outside, and here they were loading us all up into those vehicles, the other vehicles, and they loaded us up in 3 different vehicles. And my driver was Papa Wheelie Chief, and I've never experienced a ride quite like that, because I've never seen somebody try and pop a wheelie with an ambulance before. But had there not been a back bumper on the ambulance, I certainly would have a couple times. Because his concept of driving was, so normally when you're driving a manual, you push the clutch in and give it a little bit of gas and then release the clutch. Well, he would push the clutch in, push the gas pedal all the way in, and then slowly release the clutch. And thus it was kind of interesting to say the least. And we didn't know what was happening. One of the guards had told Wes that they were moving us again, and we went out and we did a big circle and came back to the exact same spot. The reason for that was probably because they wanted Matt and Rachel to think like they had moved us again. But we don't know that for sure. That was just our guess. And once again, they left. They did leave. At some point, the pickup that they were in left the group and went somewhere else, and we had no idea what happened to Matt and Rachel. The guards told us. One guard told us they were flown back to the States. The other guard told us they'd gone to Santo Domingo. And one guard told us they were back at the mission. We didn't know what happened. We just trusted that God had gotten them out safely, which he did.
What actually happened to them?
What actually happened to Matt and Rachel is they got taken. I don't remember. The story of what happened was quite intense, but they did eventually get transferred to another vehicle, and that vehicle took it to the embassy. And at the embassy, the U.S. embassy, they were given the choice of going back to Cam Base, because the FBI felt like the Cam Base was safe enough for the time being. And so they were allowed to either choose to go back there or fly back to the States. And Matt and Rachel chose to fly back to the States.
There's one little detail that we were told that because of his health, the embassy recommended that he go to the hospital. He was.
Right,
he
so
was-
they flew to Cuba first,
Yeah.
to the hospital, and he was in the hospital for a day or so.
Yeah, he was not in good shape when he left the camp. His wife said when they arrived at the embassy, he was 95% better as soon as he got to the embassy. But they still said, you better go to the hospital. So they elected to go to the hospital in Cuba, and then they were flown to the States. And I did see, I don't know if you guys watched the press release that Cam did, but there was a picture of them when they were at that hospital. And he did look rather long. He looks healthier now, but
Yeah.
he didn't look very good on that picture compared to the way he looks now. So that's just a little added detail.
Yeah, for those of you who couldn't hear my dad talking, there's just something, the detail that they were told later is that when Matt and Rachel got back to the embassy, he was 95% back to full health. And
His wife called it a miracle.
right, and we believe it was because of our prayers. That's really the only reason that we can give for that. And but the embassy thought they should still go to the hospital, so they flew him to the hospital in Cuba first, and they were there for a night, I think, and then the next day flew to the States.
So Cuba, that means Guantanamo Bay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was I think it was in the military base hospital or something like that. So that was their release. And the next thing that happened to us at this spot was a different plane started circling us. And this plane we had never seen before. We didn't understand why this plane would be circling us. It was a big 4-engine turboprop plane with something big, long, sticking out the back of the plane. It would just circle us, just drone around us in circles for 5 to 6 hours a day. And every other day, this plane would fly. The days in between, we had that little plane flying. And we coined terms for these planes so we could talk about them without the guards knowing, because they understood the word plane or airplane. They also understood the word helicopter. So the little plane was our DLP for Dear Little Plane, and the big plane was our BFG for Big Friendly Giant. And so that plane started circling us. And once again, that made us wonder, is something going to happen? We didn't know. And one day, this is getting ahead of the story a little bit, but I'll just throw this detail in while I'm on this plane. One day we decided maybe we should make some signs and wave some signs for this plane. So we made 2 signs, and we were out there. We'd wait till the guards were not looking or wouldn't see us, and then we would wait for that plane to come around and we would wave these signs. One said, "Please help." The other one said, "SOS." And I'm standing beside the signs pretending to throw up. And we did cardboard and charcoal.
Oh, there you go.
And the plane was coming around, and it saw us, or saw our signs, because it slowed down and dropped quite low, and then came around and buzzed the camp right over top of the camp at probably about 500 feet. This huge plane, and then went back up to its normal height and continued circling us. So we were pretty sure they had seen us.
Did you ever figure out what that was?
You know, probably the FBI. We assumed it was the FBI again, but we don't know.
You didn't ask the FBI in your interview if that was them and the pilot saw you guys?
I didn't know. I'm not sure if anybody else in our group did. I was going to, but I think I forgot to ask that question to them. So the next thing that happened that was a miracle was one night we were sleeping there. And so after Matt and Rachel left, there was 15 of us. There were.
Sorry, so you had the plane circling at the second spot.
Yeah, third back.
No, but then when you moved from the second spot back to the original spot, it followed you to the new
Okay.
spot?
Right. How they knew we had moved us. Okay, that's a good question. I forgot about that point. So remember that solar panel? That was how the FBI found us, because the solar panel moved with us. And they put that solar panel back up on the roof of the house in the first place. And that solar panel never worked again at that first spot. It never worked. It would never charge the batteries anymore, but it was still up there. The FBI said we knew they had moved you because of that solar panel. And we knew where you were because of where the solar panel
So
was.
they told you they knew where you were,
Yeah.
all in different places you
Yeah.
were.
They had aerial pictures in both places. And they said that the purpose of their circling was they were just making sure we were okay.
But they never used drones. You know,
We never saw them, but some people said they did. I don't know if they actually did. So yes, after Matt and Rachel left, there was 15 people. 7 people slept in the one room, 8 people slept in the other room. And so in the one room, it was Ryan and Melody and their family, and Sam and Wes and Dale. And then in the other room, it was me and Brandon and Sheldon and Cheryl, and then Sherilyn, Sandra, Kay, and Courtney. And so anyways, I slept beside Brandon on the one mattress, and he slept beside his mom and the 4 girls on the other mattress on the other side of the room. And one night I woke up and realized that someone was shaking me. Cheryl was shaking me awake, and she said, Austin, she said, Brandon is burning up with fever. And so I woke up and I was laying beside him, and I could feel, even though I was a foot or so away from him, a little bit away from him, I could just feel the heat just radiating off him. He was so hot. We didn't have a thermometer, but I would estimate his temperature was somewhere around 103. I mean, it was warm. And we had nothing. We had some ibuprofen, but his mom had given him ibuprofen before he went to bed. They hadn't helped at all. And she couldn't give him any more because you're not allowed to give more than a certain amount over a certain time. He was at that limit. So we were like, well, what do we do? So I woke Sherilyn up, which would be his older sister, and the 3 of us we gathered around him, and we put our hands on him, and we prayed that God would just miraculously heal him. And we finished praying, and it was just a miracle. Like we still had our hands on him, and you could feel his body temperature going down. Within less than 5 minutes, he was back to regular temperature. He never woke up to the whole thing. I said it was just an immediate answer to prayer, a miracle that I've never quite seen before. It was amazing. So the next thing that happened was the night that Cheryl and Kay and Sheldon were released. And Cheryl had developed, while we were at the second place, she had started developing sores across her body. These were painful sores. Seemed like it would start at an ant or a mosquito bite, and it would get infected and would start being pus-filled, and they would grow in size. Some of them were probably about this big by the time they were all said and done. I mean, just huge sores. And they were painful, and they just kept growing. And we had nothing to treat them with. We tried some things, and they kind of helped, but they just kept coming. And by the time she left, she said she had over 40 of these across her entire body. And so those sores ended up being the reason that she was released, because the guards, Ping we showed Ping one day or something, and it was getting bad enough that Ping eventually called Papa Wheelie Chief. And Papa Wheelie Chief came to look at her sores, and Kay had 3 of them, 3 or 4 on her feet and legs as well. And so he looked at both of those at them, looked at their sores, and then he took Sam aside from the group and said that he was going to see what he could do and see if he could get them released. But he said, I can't guarantee anything. The decision's not mine, but I'll see if I can get them released. Because it seemed like by that point he respected us. He was worried about our well-being, because Sam heard him mutter as he walked away that these people are going to die on our hands. And he was worried about that. So there was a possibility Cheryl was going to leave, and the one night she told me, she said, Austin, she said, if I leave, if she wasn't sure, should I insist that I take all my children too? If they release all my children? She was the mom. She had 5 children there. She's like, should I go without my children? Should I insist they release all my children? Should I stay if they don't? That was a question she was trying to figure out. And she had decided that she didn't want to go without her children. For sure, she was not going to go without her 6-year-old. There was no way she was going unless her 6-year-old could go. So 6, 14, 15, 18, and 27. And then there were 4 girls that were in between the 27 and 18-year-old that were still in the States, that weren't down in Haiti, so they were still in the States. And so she told me her husband was back at the CAN base. Right. And so that one night she told me, she said, Austin, she said, if I'm released and they don't let my children go, she said, you need to promise me to take care of my children while. And I promised her that I would. And the day that she was released, I came down with food poisoning or something like that. And I was flat on my back for 2 days as a result of that. And that night, the first day that I was down was the night they came to take Cheryl and Kay out. And they had no plans to take Sheldon out or any of the children. They were just going to take Cheryl and Kay out. And I was inside No, she was just a single VS word.
She had some of those first.
But she had some of those sales as well.
Who was Sheldon?
Sheldon was Cheryl's
6-year-old.
6-year-old boy. And so I'm inside laying there, and I think, if I remember right, I think Sherilyn was inside seeing if I needed anything because we had just finished eating supper and I had tried eating a little bit. She was seeing if I needed anything else. And we heard some vehicles drive in, and Sonia, who's the 14-year-old, Sherilyn's the 27-year-old. Sonia, the 14-year-old, comes running into the house and she's screaming that they are taking Mom and Kay and they're not letting Sheldon go. And she was just about going hysterical. And pretty soon outside, it turned into just, I mean, from inside, just sounded like absolute chaos outside. People, guards were yelling. Our group was yelling. I mean, I fully expected to hear gunshots or slaps or punches or something. I mean, it sounded like a chaos out there. And Sam's commanding them to stop in the name of Jesus. And Sheldon is screaming and crying. And eventually it did all calm down a little bit. And I heard Cheryl tell somebody, she said, I'm not going without Sheldon. So I'm not going without him. So it kind of got calmed down. Beanie made a phone call and came back and said they would take Sheldon after all. And so God worked a miracle there and allowed Sheldon to go with Cheryl and Kay. And I think that it's interesting that God took Cheryl and Kay out, but I believe God took Kay out because he knew that Cheryl needed an interpreter and needed somebody else to go with, just for moral support. They were taken back to the embassy as well. And were also given the choice of what should they go to the States or go back to base, and they chose to go back to base. Cheryl's reason for that was where Ray was, and her children were still in captivity. And Beanie promised us either that night or the next night. He promised that we were all going to be going home within the next 2 days, and they were going to take us all out in groups of 2 or 3. Because as we found out later, the negotiations had come to an agreement at that point. They had agreed with the FBI the money had been paid, and thus they were going to let us out within the next couple of days was the plan.
So you're saying that the FBI paid some of the demands?
Well, the FBI didn't, but somebody did, a third party who wants to remain anonymous, and we don't know. I don't know. I don't really want
It
to.
wasn't the FBI, it wasn't Cam.
Right, not the FBI, not Cam.
And you don't know, and it wasn't publicized how much?
Don't know the amount, don't know who did it. So we weren't sure exactly what was going to happen with them letting us go. So we talked about it. And we came up with, if they're going to take us out in groups of 2 or 3, we came up with an order of who was going to go out when. But we were still hoping and praying that God would take us all out together. That was our prayer and our cry. There were 12 of us still left, and we all wanted to leave together. Yes, sir.
So how many days are we at right now?
Once again, we were at this spot. This was pretty much split up into 3 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 weeks, roughly, give or take a little bit.
There's 62 days total. So when they said that they were going to release you in 2 days.
That was about a week and a half before we left, so 10 days or something. So we were at day 52-ish. And the thing is, nobody went out in those next 2 days. Nobody went out. And the reason for that, from what I heard later, is that Beanie wanted to let us go. The leader in prison said, no, don't want to let them go. Use them to get me out of prison. And so there was division among the gang, and they weren't together, and thus we were not let go. And the interesting thing is that it felt like to me over the next 10 days that Satan was working at trying to divide our group again, because the idea of escaping started coming back up again. And it had kind of, we had talked about it a number of times, and at this point I was still not in favor of us walking out, especially because it felt like, especially that we had talked about it at the second place we were at, about how easy it would be. But it seemed to me like the discussion of us escaping was centered around that. Let's use our own wits and brain power to get out of the camp, and then expect God to meet us out there and lead us. For example, one idea was they wanted to Benadryl the guards, put them to sleep for a whole day, give them 4 or 5 pills of Benadryl apiece, and lay them all out snoring peacefully while we walked away. And I was not in favor of that.
How are you gonna do that?
There were some ideas thrown around. The guards would come and ask us for water. Mackinson would bring us these bags of water. And then the guards would come and ask us for bags of water. So we figured we could probably slip these pills into the water, and we thought they'd probably dissolve, and maybe we could just get the guards to each take one and nighty-night. But like I said, I wasn't in favor of that because it felt to me like we were relying on ourselves and not God to get us out. Now, some people disagreed with that, and that's fine if you disagree, but that was how I felt. And the next idea that came up was an idea of a tunnel. Someone wanted to thought maybe we could dig a tunnel. This was at the last place we were at, which was really the first place, but also the last place. Wanted to dig a tunnel from the one room down, probably about 70 feet long or something, that would come up behind a row of bushes. And then one night we would all slip through the tunnel into the bushes and go down the bush row until we came to a path. So we came to the one path that would lead out of there, and then just go. Because once you got past that row of bushes, there was a big mango tree at the end of those bushes. If you got to the mango tree, you were out of sight of the guards where they were keeping track of us. And so if we could get there without them knowing we were gone, we had a good idea. We had a good chance of getting out. So the tunnel would allow us to get out without them knowing that we had gotten out. Right. It would have been hard work. The time estimate was, if everything went right, we could probably get done in about a month. And so I remember one time we were talking about that tunnel, and we were talking about it, and we were talking, and I just made the comment that, why dig a tunnel? Just forget the tunnel. If we're gonna walk out, then let's just ask God one night, pray and ask him to help us walk out, and then just walk out. Because the one door, there was the doorway that we had first come in, the very first time we entered that building, we were captive 60 plus days before. That doorway was still shut, just simply with that fence post and that piece of concrete. They wouldn't let us use that door. If we tried to open it, they would throw a pit and put that post and that piece of concrete back up against the door. And there was another door we had to go in and out of. And so I was like, let's just pray that God would help us to get that door open without them hearing us, and then let's just walk out the door and walk right across the yard in full view of the guards to that mango tree and down that. That was best.
So what was the deal with the door? Why was that door more special than?
I don't know. I guess they felt like we wouldn't have the capabilities to open it.
There was a door that you were free to go in and out of, but that door you weren't free to go in and out.
Right.
So why go out the other door?
Yeah.
Huh?
Why not go out the other?
Because that other door opened on the porch, and at nighttime there was always
That's where the
3 or 4 guards sleeping
So
on
they
the porch.
didn't guard the barricaded door.
Not as closely. Not as closely. And they would often have, and that barricaded door would open up into the courtyard between those 2 buildings. And the guards were almost always, so that was on this corner of the house, and the guards were almost always on this corner of the house over here, was where they would stay at night. But there would almost always be 1 or 2 people in that courtyard, because they had wired a power strip right outside that door on one of the posts of that wood structure outside. 2 nights before we left, we had a downpour. I mean, it rained so hard that power strip was in water. So the next day they moved that power strip over to the porch. That power strip they used to charge their radios and phones. And thus now they could charge them on the porch where there was no rain, but that meant that for the last 3 nights we were there was never a guard in between those 2 buildings outside that door that we know of. So we talked about walking out. There was definitely some division. We felt like, I remember I felt like that Satan was trying to divide us, because I didn't know if God wanted us to walk out. I mean, he could have. I wasn't against the idea. I just wanted God to tell me that's what he wanted me to do. And I didn't know at this point. At this point, I felt like God was still telling us he wanted us to stay. And there were some people in the group that felt like he wanted us to walk. And so there was definitely some division, and it kind of came to a little bit of a head one day in a conversation. And we had a conversation that was the night after that big rainstorm, because a couple of them thought that we missed our opportunity to walk out that night of the rainstorm. They said all the guards were on the porch. We could have went out that door, walked out through the flood, and got out, which we might have been able to, but it would have been a muddy mess. We might have made it. We might not have. And I'm not going to say one way or the other. And they felt like we missed an opportunity in not doing that. So the interesting thing is one night before that big rainstorm, the guards had decided to clean our house that day, bleach it and wash it, trying to get rid of the ants. And they had opened that door we were never supposed to open to help air the rooms out. And when we went to bed that night, that door was still open. So we closed it and latched it from the inside, but there was nothing locking that door from the outside. We could still open that door and go out at any time if we wanted to. And Courtney and Sonia decided they were going to put a fleece before God. They didn't tell anybody about this, but they both prayed and said, God, if that door is still free on the outside at 8 o'clock, we're going to walk out. And they didn't tell anybody about this until afterwards.
8 at night or 8 in the morning?
8 at night. And so Wes, by this point, had figured out that if we were going to walk out, we probably could just walk out through the bushes on the west side. There was like a path. If you went through the bushes and back behind the bushes, there was a path you could follow down to that mango tree. And you were pretty much hidden from the guards in the yard if you stayed low. Now, they might hear you, but you were pretty much hidden from sight. And so that was kind of the plan. They were thinking we'd walk out into those bushes, get on that path, go to that mango tree, and walk out. It's kind of the plan they were thinking. And 8 o'clock rolled around, and I saw Sonia lean over to Courtney and say, it's 8 o'clock, and thunk. That post came back down against the door right at 8 o'clock on the button. And so once again, God very clearly said, not yet. So the morning after the rainstorm, we had somewhat of a confrontation talking about this. We talked about it, and there was some division going on. And so me and two other people who were on the side of not walking out, I guess you could say, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know what God wanted. So we went into the house, we prayed, we asked God, please just talk to somebody. Show somebody in our group what you want us to do. And that next morning, God finally spoke. I say finally, he was probably speaking before, but we finally had a clear answer to that prayer. When God spoke to Ryan, and Ryan told us at the 1 o'clock prayer meeting that he felt like God had spoke to him this morning and told him that you're supposed to take your family out tonight. And he told us about that. He told us how he came to that conclusion. He told us a story about one of his cousins, his cousin Grant Bontrager. I don't know if any of you know Grant Bontrager, but he told us that story as well. And he just felt like God wanted us to do something that might not be easy, it might be difficult, it might be dangerous, but he felt like that God was telling him we need to go tonight. And he said anybody that wants to go is free to go. He's welcome to come. Anybody who wants to stay is welcome to stay. He said you don't have to feel obligated to come.
Who was in his family?
Ryan and Melody and Andre and Noah.
Andre was pretty sick too.
Right. By this point, Andre was definitely dealing with some health issues. He was running a fever just about all, low fever about all day, and cry at night. He wasn't.
And had he been against escaping prior to this?
Ryan?
Yeah.
Kind of, just simply because he had his family to look after, and he was the idea of trying to run with his family. And what happened to the cop to his family was he was scared about that. He wasn't sure about money. He wasn't opposed to the idea, but he just wasn't sure about his family where it was. But now he was very much, I think God wants him to go.
This is the family that the wife was related to.
James the sheriff. So he told that story, and then he wanted each of us in our group to give our opinion of that. And it was amazing because he said later that he was not sure how Austin would receive this story and what he had heard. But for the first time, I was 100% at peace with what I heard. God had finally answered our prayer and spoken, and I was at peace with walking out. And I believe that God wanted us to do this tonight. And so, and Ryan was there's two things that he said that was quite interesting. One thing that he had used as somewhat of another answer from God is that morning Wes had dove into the bushes to do some more investigating. And Ryan knew he was in there, and Ryan told God, said, God, if you don't want us to walk out tonight, make Wes come back out of the bushes saying it's impossible. There's no way we can do it. And Wes came out of the bushes and said, guys, it's totally possible we can do it. And he was totally for it. And so in Ryan's mind, that was another confirmation God wanted us to, and I felt the same way. when I heard that story, I felt the same way. And Ryan also said, and let's not spend a lot of time figuring out the details. Let's just be ready and let God work out the details. So I mean, we did what we could. We packed some things. We got some water. We decided on a time, what time we'd wake up, and start seeing if we can get out. And that time was 1:30 in the morning. So we went to bed, and we had started about 2 days before Matt and Rachel were released. We had started a 24-hour prayer chain among our group. We would take one of the watches. We would pass the watch around from person to person. We would try and pray for 24 hours. It didn't always work. Some people would fall asleep sometimes, myself included, especially if it was at nighttime. But we tried as best we could. And so in the daytime, it was a half-hour prayer per person. Nighttime, we were supposed to take an hour to pray before we passed the watch on. So my turn to pray came at about 12:30. And at about 12:30, right after midnight. And so I just, no, sorry, 12, about 12 or 12:30, something like that. So I just stayed up until 1:30. And I was just listening to what was going on outside. There were two things we were hoping for. One, we were hoping the generator would be running. The last 2 nights, the generator had not run because it was out of oil. That night, Maxon had showed up at the door and heard that the generator was out of oil and said, "I'll get you oil." And he went to extra pains, and within an hour or so, we had the generator running because it would help with masking noise. And the second thing we hoped was that the guards would be quiet. And I woke up at 12 and I was praying and listening, and the guards were not quiet. They were not calm. They were active. They were talking. They were yelling. They were blasting music at times. And I was like, oh, wow, they are not what you would call calm. But by this point, I was convinced that God wanted us to walk out. So I wasn't worried. I wasn't scared because I knew that if God didn't want us to walk out, he'd stop us at the door or shortly after the door. And all the guards would do is yell at us and maybe get upset at us, but just send us back inside and just be more careful watching us the next day. Or if we wanted to get away, God would work out the details and we'd get away. So our idea was that we were going to push the rock out of the way. The door was 2 planks of wood with trim boards all around the outside of the door and on the joint and in the middle. And so this bottom trim board right here was loose, and there was a crack between those 2 planks that you could easily look out. And so you could see that courtyard, see if anybody was sitting in that courtyard. And we figured it was a big enough crack we could take a stick and use a stick to push that piece of concrete out of the way, and then use that same stick to lift the post up so that we could open the door and somebody could reach their hand out and get a hold of the post, so we could just slowly work that post up and slip somebody outside. Then they could lift that post away from the door. That was the plan. And so 1:30 rolled around, and we got up and we're checking to see where the guards are at. They're active as we want to go. And I was convinced that God wants to go. So I said, yes, let's go. Let's get this started. Let's go. I think God wants us to go. So we finally decided, okay, we pushed that stone away with the stick. The stone rolled about 2-3 feet away from the door and stayed there.
So you could tell if the guards were still awake?
Yeah, there were enough cracks. This house that we were in by this point had 6 doors, and 5 of them were barricaded and 1 was open. And those doors had cracks and stuff all around. You could see out in just about in all directions. So we could see all 9 of the guards from inside the house. We could see them. And so we pushed the stone away. It rolled away from the door. And we went back to check on the guards, see if anybody heard anything. About that quick, here comes the guard. He had to go out to use the bathroom. The spot where we were going in the bushes was right beside the bathroom, so we had to wait. So he got into the bathroom. He came out and walked back to where the other guards were. We're out there watching, looking, trying to decide are the guards too active? Should we go? Should we not go? And Brandon decided that trim board that was loose, decided to see if he could pull it off to give us more room to work our stick up for that post. So he pulled it off, and it came off with a pretty sharp pop, loud enough that Ping heard it. And Ping comes walking around the house to that door and stops right in that front of that door. And I wasn't there watching. Courtney was watching out the crack in the door when he was there. And we are all, as a group, right inside that room. We all got our shoes on. We got water bags stuffed in our clothes. We got the babies there. We got the one mattress stacked on top of the other one because we were ready to go.
And the rock was rolled away.
And the rock was rolled away. Right in front of him. And Ping comes around there and looks. And like I said, any other time that we tried to open that door, they would close it very with quite a bit of vigor. and noise included. And so Ping stood there and looked at that door for about 2 minutes and then turned and walked away. Didn't do anything. The stone was still about 3 feet away from the door. He
Okay,
didn't do
so I got a
anything.
question. Do you think he knew you guys were going?
No, I don't think he did. I honestly think that what happened there was that God made him see that rock still leaning against the door when it was 3 feet away. That's what I believe. Because any other time he would have put that. He told us at one point that if we escape, his life is on the line if we escape. And so he was not going to let us out on his own accord. No way. Because that was basically giving his life up. So I think God did a miracle right there and did not let him see that rock away from the door. And so we thought when he left that he was going to come inside the house. So we frantically all headed back for beds and threw the matches back on the floor, and down on the matches we all plopped, pretending like we were sleeping. And but he didn't come in. He just went back to where the other guards were. But he was upset about something, but he wasn't shouting about it all. We could hear him yelling at someone or talking pretty loudly to one of the other guards, but no big deal. And suddenly the people in our group that have been the most outspoken about walking out were like, well, should we do it now? I mean, is it safe to go out? And I'm like, yes, guys, it is safe to go out. He didn't see that rock. That rock was right there. He didn't see it. God kept him seeing it. Let's go, is what I was saying.
You also, maybe you're gonna use the time, don't forget to work the time in here.
Right, because we had decided that by 3 o'clock in the morning, if we weren't out, we were gonna can the idea for that night. If we weren't out by 3 o'clock, at this point it was 2 o'clock, and so we waited until 2:30. 2:30 rolled around, and I got Wes. I talked to Wes and Sam again. I said, you know, this is our last chance, is what they were saying, if we're gonna get out. And I said, yes, let's go. That rock, he didn't see it. God wants us to go. And so they finally we all agreed, okay, we're gonna take the next step and move that post and see if we can get out. So we moved the post. That went off without a hitch. And Wes slipped out and he went outside and looked around just to make sure the guards were all on that side of the house like we thought. And he was going to come back in and say all clear if it was ready to go. And we had a predetermined order that we were going to go out behind him to those bushes and into the bushes. He came back and he said all clear. And out the door we went. It was probably less than a minute from the time he said all clear to the time we were all inside the bushes, behind that row of bushes. And the stone and the post are back against the door like they had been the night before. The order was Wes was in front, and then it was Melody, and then Ryan, and then Courtney, Brandon, Sonia, Sherilyn, myself, Dale, and Sam. And Dale and Sam were going to put everything back the way it was. And I remember I got to the edge of the bushes, and I looked back to see how that was going. And I was like 2 steps into the bushes, and I looked back to see how it was going, and Sam and Dale were already right behind me. And the rock and stone were against the door. So they moved quick. We got in the bushes and we hiked down that row of bushes, and I think God blinded their ears or covered their ears too, because it was not quiet going through those bushes. And at this point, we were probably less than 100 feet from all 9 guards, and they were still quite active, quite noisy.
Was the music still loud?
No, I didn't hear any music, but the generator was still running. So that was masking some, but I still think God did cover their ears to a certain extent. We got to that mango tree and headed off west. We had a mountain feature. We could see a mountain from where this camp was, and we could see a highway on that mountain that we knew was a highway between the Haiti and Dominican Republic. So and there was a mountain feature. We were headed for that mountain feature on the side of that mountain. And so that was kind of northwest was the direction we were going. And we used the stars. We could see the Big Dipper. So we could use the North Star to help guide our direction as well. The moon was bright, so it was really, really easy to see at first. We headed off down that path, and we're walking beside this canal. We got to get across this canal somehow. And we're looking for a spot to cross. We couldn't find a spot, so finally we just kind of slogged our way across, and some people got wet. One of the girls almost lost her flip-flop in the mud on the bottom, but we all managed to get across, albeit some of us were a little bit wet. And God has such a unique sense of humor, because we walked about 500 feet farther down and found a bridge that went across the canal. And we were already across.
Oh, chilling, okay.
They're being carried.
Two of them.
Both asleep, they're carried. And from then on, we just did. And Wes was in the front, and he pretty much just chose the path of least resistance. And we moved. He told Melody, as fast as you can walk, carrying Laura. He said, "I'm going to go that fast. If you can't keep up, tell me, and I'll slow down." We probably did 5 to 6 miles in that first hour, hour and a half. I mean, we moved. We went through a village. We went right down the main street of a village in the middle of the night. Didn't see anybody. We saw some animals, some donkeys beside the road, but we didn't see anybody. We didn't see anybody the whole walk on our walk to freedom, as it were. We didn't see anybody.
Where were you trying to get?
We were trying to get to that highway, that road that was called 3. We were trying to get to 3. And then from there, we were going to figure out what should we do. Should we try and get a hold of a phone, or should we go to a police station? There was a police station down Highway 3 a little ways. What should we do? Yes,
This was not 5 or 6 miles directly. They were going north, then
Right.
west, then
Right.
north, then west. So they were zigzagging their way. They might have, after that 5 or 6 miles walking, they might have only been 2 or 3 miles away from where they are.
Right. This was our walking. We were not walking in a straight line towards that landmark. We were just zigzagging the path of least resistance. So we got through the village, kept on walking, came to a lake, skirted the lake, walked around the edge of the lake, and dove into woods. And it was right about this time that the moon set. And have any of you ever tried to crawl through woods that are full of thorns, probably about this long? Just on every tree and bush that you brush into, and you can't see a thing, and you're just feeling your way by your hands, and feeling your way through. And there's 12 people. We got in single file. One person was in the front. They would just slowly work their way through and try and break off thorns for other people behind them. And we would try and protect each other from thorns and that kind of stuff. And we snaked our way back and forth through that forest. We were in there at that forest for about 2.5 to 3.5 hours through those thorns. And we just, and the amazing thing was, is every time we came to a spot where it looked like there was no place to go, we stopped and prayed and said, "God, show us where to go." And each time someone found a way out, and we kept on going. And we came out of that forest of thorns. There were cactuses. We walked past cactuses that were probably 18 to 20 feet
Hey,
tall.
Ben, that camera is not showing a picture on the backside.
Yeah, I had to switch to my battery.
So I'm almost done. And so we came out of the woods about daybreak, and the sunrise came up. God gave us the most beautiful sunrise I've ever seen in my life. The night before, he'd given us the most beautiful sunset I'd ever seen in my life, and we had been standing there singing and praying, watching the sunset. And he gave us a beautiful sunrise. We kept on walking. Eventually, we got out of the forest and came to our road and decided to start hiking down the road. The road ran parallel with the mountain we were heading towards, so it ran east and west. So we decided to head down the road west, and this was a typical Haitian road, bumpy, not very smooth. And so we're trucking our way down this road, and we probably were going too fast. And Melody was carrying Laura. She's walking along, and all of a sudden she tripped. And just bam, right down on top of Laura on the ground. Laura had been sleeping. Of course, she woke up and she started screaming. I mean, I expected she was hurt. Thankfully, she wasn't. But now we're in the middle of this road. It's daybreak. We've got these 12 white people in the middle of gang territory, not very inconspicuous. Laura's screaming her head off. Now what do we do? Well, Dale was in the lead at that point. He went running ahead and he said, "Hey," he said, "there's a cow path up here. Let's get on the cow path, please." So we went up about 100 feet, and there was a cow path up to the north. So we got on that cow path, and someone said, "Well, what if it's the driveway of someone's house?" Well, if this is, we're bound to meet up with people at some point. Let's just trust God. So we started walking down that cow path. And at this point, I was in the back because Sam and Dale were in the front. Dale was leading, and Sam had gone up there to talk with the guys in front about what we should do. And we hadn't been on that cow path more than 2 minutes when 2 vehicles went past on the road where we had entered that cow path. I don't know what those 2 vehicles were. God only knows. But they may have been friendly, they may have not been friendly. So we kept walking on that cow path, heading towards Highway 3. Eventually, we got close enough, and we to Highway 3. We stopped, we took a break, and by this point, we figured the guards had probably figured out that we were gone. And we just hoped and prayed that those guards would just run. Because we knew that they had said the gang would kill them if we escaped, and we hoped the gang didn't kill them. We hoped they got a chance to get away. And that they saw the simple hand of God taking us out of there. And so we got to where we could see 3 pretty easily, and we sat down, had a rest, and prayed once again, asking God, what should we do? Should we try to get a phone? Should we keep walking? Should we go to the police station? We didn't know exactly what to do. We got done praying, and I said, guys, I think God wants, I think we should find a phone. I said, if God got us out of this camp like the way he did, then he will make sure the first person we meet is the person to help us. And so they agreed on that. We agreed on that. So Sam and Wes went off to find a phone because they were the ones who spoke Creole the most fluently. So they went. The rest of us found a spot kind of over the crest of the hill, so we couldn't be seen from 3. Just sat there and prayed. Sam and Wes went down the hill, down to a little ravine, and ran into a farmer down there. And Sam asked him if he had a phone they could use. He said, no, I don't. He said, but there's a house over there. If you go to that house, they have a phone you can use. And so Sam and Wes went over there, made the phone call, got a hold of Barry at the base, told them where they were. Barry said, me and Phil Mast, said, we're in the pickups, we're on our way. Wes came back to get the rest of us at the top of the hill. We walked down to that house, walked down the road, and walked to the road and walked down the road. There was a police checkpoint down there. We were walking down towards that police checkpoint, and we saw Barry and Phil pull up in the 2 vehicles waiting. And they climbed down after some hugs and tears. We all piled in the 2 vehicles and headed back to camp.
So how far?
Getting back to camp about 8:30 in the morning.
How far were you away from them? Like, how far did you have to come?
About 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So got back there at about 8:30. And I remember distinctly, I told some people in our group, I said, I said, if we get back to camp in the daytime sometime, I said, the reunion that we're going to have back there is going to be, I think, just a small taste of what it's going to be like when Jesus comes back the second time and takes us to heaven. That reunion in heaven, and it didn't disappoint. We drove in the gate of Cam, and Ray, which would be Sherilyn and Courtney and Brandon's son, Sonia's dad, was right out in the gate when we walked in, when we drove in. We drove in, and he lifted both hands in the air and started yodeling. And people start coming from all directions on the camp base, and it didn't disappoint. Like I said, it was an amazing reunion, and all orchestrated by God's hand. It was just amazing how God led us. The FBI said that that's never happened. We're 12 people in those circumstances that walked out of the camp. Never happened. They said that will go down in the history books as one of the greatest escapes ever.
So the FBI was not involved in,
Huh?
the FBI did not come and pull you out of there and anything.
No, God did it. God and
Just
God
let
alone.
them.
How did you get to Florida then?
So we were at the base, and the people who had been at the base had packed all our stuff up because they knew by this point the decision had been made that camp was done in Haiti for the time being. And so all white missionaries needed to be evacuated. And so everything was packed and ready for us. We got back there. The original plan was either you could fly out that day and the embassy would get a special flight down there for us, or you could fly out commercially the next day. And so each person was going to have a choice as to what they wanted to do. Well, the FBI made the choice for us and said, you're all flying out that same day. So we got to the base about 8:30. We left to go to the airport about 2:30 in the afternoon.